morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good, good, good morning, sun. Good, good morning, light. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above.
And good morning. Is this working? Yes. Sorry, there's a several second delay before I can verify things. Okay. Well, good morning. It is Saturday. Yes, Saturday. And I attended Sarov Diani's BC Open discussion this morning. If you are not familiar with it, check it out. I've tweeted about it and talked about it in prior videos. For me in Los Angeles on Pacific time, it is currently at 8:30 a.m. Pacific time on Saturday morning. So a little bit early, but I just make coffee. We hang out, chat. He covers several topics, everything from older versions of Nav all the way through upgrades, through on-prem BC to BC SaaS, APIs, you name it. So it's a regular potpourri of content. And if you have any questions, you can submit them to Sarov in advance, or there's usually time to ask questions during the session. So check it out if you are available on a Saturday. And so today I wanted to share a journey that I've been on the last week, I guess, to add just one field to a Business Central page. And famous last words, how hard can that be? Well, in the few extensions I've developed for Business Central, being one or two, I have learned that you can no longer assume that adding one field to a page, even if it's an existing Business Central field or value that is kind of related to or on that page, you can no longer assume that that is just a simple endeavor of exposing that field. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's super simple. The field is there. You just make it visible. Other times you just add a flow field, and it's a really simple process. This one was a little different, and so I'm learning each page can be a little different, each field can be different, and you may need to do entirely different things depending on the page or the field. So this is a story about one such journey that was different. And I would like to thank these people who helped me on this particular journey. This started with the conversations started with a random Twitter post that I made about flow filters or something, and Eric responded with his excellent video on FlowFields. I think it's called like BC's Superpower FlowFields. Excellent video if you want to learn about just practical example of flow fields, how they can be used, and neat things it can do. Eric's video is excellent. And I believe he mentions flow filters. I need to go rewatch it again. And that turned into a discussion where I tried to kind of reference what I was trying to do. And Gunnar responded with some great information that I'll cover. And then after I was showing on Twitter that I was going in circles, Henrik offered to help, and we had a call, and he was very helpful, showing me how to develop some code for this, which I'll show. And then I had a call with Jeremy to discuss different options and pros and cons. And then this morning, on the call with Sarov, I asked his opinion, and he offered his thoughts that supports one particular approach depending on what the customer needs. So it's a great community. If you're not involved on Twitter, I highly recommend it. These are great discussions, very, very valuable discussions, some great offers of help. So with that, Thanks, everyone. So here's a simple request. Customer says, I just want one field on one page. Super simple. Come on. How hard is this? Well, actually, they first complain, how come Business Central doesn't already show this, right? And as I've kind of learned, let's say there are 100 fields in a given table behind the scenes. They can't display 100 fields on a list page, and they can't make 100 fields all available on the page, hidden, in order for you to enable them via personalized. It would just be this mass of data that has to be retrieved, and it's hidden, and then you go into personalized. And anyway, it starts to get kind of messy just because there's a fair amount of data. So after the customer gets over the fact that this field is not already displayed on this page, they say, well, can you display it? And I say, well, I now know I need to look at the page, I need to look at the field, I need to think about what needs to be done, and I now just do a small proposal or change request to provide them with an estimate. Because if I jump in and say, sure, one field, how hard can it be? I will instantly regret that. So the request is, the customer wants to display the source name field on the general ledger entries list page. So you'll see in this screenshot, we have these look like the accounts receivable general ledger entries. And you see we have documents, these are posted invoices and for customers. And if you look behind the scenes, if you see in the bottom here, I have the page inspection open, and you see that the source for this record is customer, and the source number is 20,000. So given this, we know that this relates to a customer, and we know this transaction relates to customer 20,000. So we just need to go get that customer name and display it in this column here. Super easy, right? Slap a flow field on there and you're ready to go. Except there's one catch. The general ledger entries page doesn't just display receivables or customer source type records. So you may have several different values for source type. You can have customer transactions. You can have vendor transactions. So depending on where that transaction originated, that's the term I use in the GP world. It's the originating source transaction. It could come from receivables or sales. It could come from payables or AP. And the general ledger entries page will reference the customer, the vendor. And if you dig into the BC code, you will see that it can be a customer, vendor, bank account, fixed asset, IC partner, which I don't yet know what that is. I don't know if that's intercompany or something else, and then employee. So it can be one of those values. And so there's blank, and then there's 6 values. So, okay, we can have multiple sources for our what I'll call our master record, our customer, our vendor, our fixed asset, employee, whatever. So I was thinking, okay, well, if I can do a flow field for customer, I can do a flow field for vendor. Can I just, do a conditional flow field? If source type is customer, if source type is vendor, do the appropriate flow field. Come on, how hard is that? And I didn't know what the lingo was for that in AL. And it turns out you cannot do a single field that is a conditional flow field. You can't have an if statement or a case statement within the field that calls different flow fields. And I can understand there's some complexities with that. So behind the scenes, that's just not possible. So what we can do, what I did as a test is I said, okay, this is what it looks like with customer entries or receivable entries. I can display the source type, and I can display the source number, and I can use a flow field to grab the customer name. I can separately do the same thing for vendors. So how do I do both at the same time? And it's not really both. It's either customer or vendor. And how do I have code that switches between those two? That's the big question. And so let's take a look at what that might look like. So here I have the general ledger entries page. And in this case, I'm showing the accounts receivable GL account. Now, this is my first try of what I was trying to do. And so I said, okay, I'm going to add a field, a table extension with the field customer name and with the field vendor name. And I am going to do a page extension to expose those fields. So I'm first going to show the source type, then I'm going to show the source number because those fields are available from that data set on the GL entries page. And there I'm going to display my customer name, and here I'm going to display my vendor name. Pretty simple. So we got that. And what I was trying to figure out is, okay, let's say that I want to have a field called source name. And if it is a source type of customer, display this. If it's a source type of vendor, display that. And actually, let me make this larger. Sorry. Okay. So how do you do that? What is the trick for this conditional display A or B values, or display field 1 or field 2? I didn't know. So a colleague and I looked at this and he said, well, is there a way in my table extension to have this kind of pseudo field? It's not really a database, like a table field. It's not a physical field, but we'll call it source name. And can we do something such that, when this thing is displayed or rendered or read, that it has a variable value? Sometimes it will display customer name, sometimes it'll display vendor name, other times employee. And maybe down here we have something, because in the Twitter conversation, Eric Hugard says, well, you probably need to do a procedure to handle this situation. And of course, I didn't know how to do that. So I was like, well, can I have some procedure that gets the source name and sends it up to this field? That's kind of what I was thinking, completely lacking the language or the understanding of the mechanics of how AL does this. Like in the .NET world, in the GP world, I understand, I have the context, I have the knowledge, I understand how these pieces would come together. It's more of a standard SQL operation. In AL, you need to use the AL tools and do things slightly differently. Well, turns out this was a dead end. Anyone who knows AL is understanding that this design isn't really a thing. It's not valid. So let me comment that out. So this didn't work. And so I had several dead ends, and I looked into table relations, FlowFields, flow filters, and one thing I need to figure out is I couldn't find good samples. So the MS Docs on, say, FlowFields is a very rudimentary sample. And Eric's video shows you how to do certain things, but it's in a certain context. And I didn't know how to find out how to do this. So thankfully, Henrik was willing to have a call with me, and he showed me how to do this. Okay, so here, let me just get rid of all these annoying warnings, and let me download symbols. Okay. There we go. So here I have a table extension, and I'm going to, where's my errors? Of course, I was messing with this last night. Okay, so I think I have, I was just messing around. Okay, let's try this again. So here I have a table extension, and I'm exposing a procedure called source name PTE. Maybe I should start with the page. So I have the general ledger entries page. I'm going to create a page extension for that. And Henrik taught me that I can use this naming convention, general ledger entries PTE, and makes sense, makes it clear it's a per tenant extension. And it is named the same as the underlying page. And I don't need to display the source type and source number, although I could for just debugging or review or testing purposes. What I'm going to do is expose this field called source name, and it's going to show the value source name PTE. Okay, well, where is that coming from? Well, it's coming from a table extension where I'm exposing a procedure called source name PTE. And this calls a code unit. This is kind of the slightly fancier version. You could have all of the code here in your table extension, but I kind of cleaned it up to move the code out of the table extension into a code unit. And it retrieves source name for the given GL entry record. Okay, so let's press F12 to drill in the source name. So here's my code unit called source name, and it has a procedure called source name that receives a parameter of GL entry record, returns text. And let me just get rid of this. I kind of refactored it a couple times. So I am reading the source number and reading the source type. And this is just my quirky way. I'll probably remove this. I've been informed this probably isn't best practice, but it's kind of a habit I had from the .NET days. But anyway, I'm getting source number, getting source type from the GL entry that's being passed in. If the source number is blank, I'm going to exit and return a blank string. And now I'm going to do a case statement. This is how this is handling whether it's a customer, a vendor, employee, fixed asset, etc. So this is saying, hey, if this source type enum is type customer, then go get the customer name. And that itself is a separate little procedure. Then if the source type is vendor, get the vendor name. You're probably seeing a trend here. Employee, employee full name, fixed asset description. And if I then say, well, what is customer name? I jump down here to this procedure, and this creates a variable of a customer record, and it is getting the customer based on the customer number, which is the source number from, if we go here, it is the source number up there from the GL entry record. So this is kind of, this particular code is kind of tiered because it's pushing things out to a code unit, pushing things out to different procedures. But given the source number in the GL entry record, this retrieves the customer name. It then passes that back, and it exits up here, returns that as a text value to whoever calls source name, and that, of course, is bubbling up first to the table extension and then to the page extension. So that is one way to do it. This is I asked Henrik, like, what is the simplest way to do this? Like, what's the down and dirty way to do this? And we first added the code just to the table extension, exact same code essentially. And then I later moved it out to a code unit and broke out the procedures to make everything more granular. But essentially what this is doing is, as each record is being read, this code is going out and saying, okay, we have customer 20,000. I'm going to go grab the name. That is Trey Research. Next record, customer 30,000. The name, School of Fine Art. And then 50,000, Rela Cloud. And so one by one is kind of how the code runs. I don't know how the compiler is working behind the scenes, but in theory, for each record, it's retrieving these values via a get command from the corresponding table. So that's one way. It's simple, it's effective. Now that I know how to do it, it shouldn't take long. So let me do a Control F5. Let's see if this works. Oh, package could not be created. Okay, so I was messing around. 50150. What was I doing? Okay, so I was messing around with events, which I will show later. Okay, so let's try this again. Control F5. And there we go. Brings up this page, and I want to go to accounts receivable. And look at that. For this transaction, it knows that the source type is customer, the source number is 20,000, and it goes to the customer table, retrieves the name for that customer, says, great, that's Trey Research. It gets displayed on the page. Pretty slick. If I were to do this from scratch now, probably easily do it in an hour is my guess. I'd have to look at my notes, of course, but not difficult. For my world, super easy. No data access layer, no authentication, no separate deployment, configuration, installation. Like just there's so much less overhead compared to what I'm used to. So for me, this is pretty clean. However, this leads to questions. So you can certainly do it this way. This works. The customer won't know the difference. They'll say, great, I see the source name. They'll be happy. So let's go back to old PowerPoint here. Now, after I did this, I spoke with Jeremy. We talked about, well, there are alternatives. And Jeremy explained to me, well, if he were to do this, he would probably take a different approach for a few reasons. It's not like better or worse or technical distinctions or coding preferences. It's more about customer requirements. So I'll break them down into categories. It's not a better or worse scenario, but I just showed you the simple show the field solution, right? So I have a page extension, table extension, I have a code unit with a procedure, and it gets the job done. Well, Jeremy said he would probably take a different approach of creating a table extension with a custom field, let's call it source name, such that you can store the source name with that GL entry record. So when that happens, let's say you post a transaction, it goes into the GL, your code is going to write the value of Trey Research into the source name field for that GL entry. That way, the name is stored with the GL entry, and it is contained in the table or the table extension. All the data is in one place. And when you open up this page, you're not having to retrieve the value with every record. It's there, you're not having to look up the source name with every record. It is there in the table. So why would you do this? Couple reasons. One is, once it's inserted in that table, when you retrieve that data, it's just right there in the table extension field. You're not having to do a bunch of lookups to the various tables in real time on the fly as you're retrieving that data. So in theory, I guess you might argue that it's more read efficient in that manner, in that respect. But there's a second reason, and it has to do with auditing. So if the customer needs this information to present to auditors, the auditors typically would want that information to be stored with the transaction. So let's say that let's take the vendor example. The vendor in January was called Acme Plumbing. And then in October, the vendor changed their name to Acme General Construction, Inc. Well, if you are only reading the current vendor name using the get or using the flow field or lookup or something like that, all the transactions from January 1st to December 31st are going to show Acme General Construction, even though a check was cut to Acme Plumbing in April. So the auditor may say, wait a minute, you cut a check to someone named Acme Plumbing. There is no Acme Plumbing. this vendor is called Acme General Construction. We have a discrepancy and you have to answer 20 questions. Well, if you're storing the source name with the GL entry, through say October, you will see Acme Plumbing. After October, you will see Acme General Construction, and that information is stored in the general ledger entries. So that makes total sense. Now, I don't know what countries that may be an audit requirement. It may be customer specific preference. It may be auditor specific preference. I don't know. But that's a question you could put to the customer. Hey, do you need this stored in the general ledger entry in order to support your audit paperwork? Do you need this in order to support your GL reconciliation on a monthly basis? Do you want to be able to see that? And I don't think it's a huge distinction, but it is a technical difference that may matter to your customer. So that's the second approach that Jeremy explained he would probably lean towards. And I asked Saurav about this morning, and he actually said the same thing. He says that, in his experience, having been asked about this type of stuff before, he leans towards the storing the field value approach, because that way it gets stored at the time of the transaction and there's no confusion if that master record name changes. So something to think about. And in the Dynamics GP world, the source name, the equivalent of source name, is stored with the general ledger transaction. So I can go back and I can see the name related to that. So I'm pretty sure I can, if I recall correctly. So that's built into GP, and this really isn't something that has to be customized in the GP world. So it required some thought for me to figure this out. Well, in the midst of the Twitter conversation, Gunnar, he kind of saw what I was trying to do, and he's like, aha, that looks very much like a project I did called GL Source Names. Oh, and by the way, that's a free app in AppSource. I was like, well, that's good to know. So in theory, instead of me developing this as a customization, the customer can just go to AppSource, click on Get It Now, install it in their tenant, and test it and give it a try. However, well, let me put that on pause for a second. So that is an option, and I looked at that. I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. So I'm going to offer that to the customer as an option, but I'll explain some caveats, and it's related to these options. So just basically, this GL source names, based on my review of the code, it uses a fancier way of making the retrieval of the source name more efficient, but it does not store the source name with the GL entry record. It is done as a lookup through FlowFields. So as that general ledger entries list page is displayed, it goes and looks up the source name in a pretty efficient manner, but it is a real-time lookup. So if you change the customer name, vendor name, employee name throughout the year, you're going to just see the new value. You will not see the old value at the time of the transaction. So that may be a consideration. Okay, so how do we choose among these? I'll call them the three options. Well, what did the customer ask for? They just said, I want this one field on this one page. And it's up to me and the consultant to have a discussion with them to try to figure out what they want. And then what does the customer actually need today? Because oftentimes the customer will say, I just need this one field. And you say, great, you deliver the one field. Then tomorrow they say, oh, well, I also need X. I need Y. I need it to do this and this and this. And you're like, okay, we need to do this over again, or we need a different solution. So it's good to ask, okay, what else might you need? And will there be an audit requirement to save the source name with the general ledger entry, right? Do they need to see the difference from January to December? What are the pros and cons of each design? As far as I could tell, the development effort is not huge between just displaying it and doing a table extension with a field where you store it. There's a little more work. You have to have some Code Unit 12 events and tap into those so that when there is a general ledger entry insert, your code fires and inserts the source name. But It looks like once I figure that out, it's not like it's days of work. It's just maybe an hour or two more. What is the cost of each approach? Negligible. The app source extension is free, so there is that. There is still testing and review and seeing if it meets the customer needs. And maybe they do have an audit requirement and maybe it won't work. So is the app source solution the best option? Maybe, maybe not. Now that I've seen how it works, which I'll mention, it is on GitHub as open source, I believe it is not storing the source name. So the audit requirement may rule out the free app source option if your customer is saying they absolutely need to have the source name stored. So a seemingly simple request of adding one field to one page can spawn a significant conversation about how it needs to be done. And unfortunately, the customer will just, their eyes may glaze over and say, like, I just want one field, just do it. Like, I don't want to have to worry about this. And I get that. But, it's stuff we often have to think about as consultants. So then the question which Jeremy pointed out is, well, what about reports? Are they going to tomorrow ask for different reports? Are they going to ask for APIs? Are they going to ask for OData connections? Do they want to have this flow in Power BI? And so there may be some considerations when a customer asks to display a field on one page. Well, where else do they need that field displayed? And oftentimes reports can be a challenge, and those may not be helped. So whatever effort you do to display it on a page, you may have to do completely different effort, have completely different implementation in order to get it on the report. But there may be some situations where if you're populating a table, maybe you can include some fields so that you help support a report customization. And so related to the GL Source Names app, in addition to it being a free extension, Gunnar has a fantastic blog series from 2016 where he developed this app source extension. And if you remember back to 2016, that was a while ago, so 4 years ago, he developed this as an extension, submitted it to AppSource, and went through that process when the product was still called Dynamics 365 Financials. And if that doesn't blow your mind, like when I saw the dates on his blog posts, I said, wow, that is crazy. That was early days, right? So fantastic series on his process of publishing the app on AppSource. And I checked, and based on a glance, I'm not seeing extensive discussion on the development of the extension, but it's more about the process of packaging it up and going through all the registration and sign up and approval and submission processes for AppSource. So it's still a fantastic series for that information. So I'm going to be reviewing that soon. Also, just incredibly awesome, he has posted this solution in GitHub as an open source solution. So you can clone that code, download it, which I've done, and I'll probably do a separate video showing what I'm learning from that. So fantastic resource if you're interested in learning about some clever ways of doing page and table extensions, having events or triggers. I need to learn the terminology. He's got install routines. He's got install wizards, configuration tables, really all sorts of different features. So it's nice to see an actual real world product implementation of those AL features. And I need to look at this, but this is, he also provided the link to his DevOps repository where he has builds of the GL source name product. And so if you want an on-prem version or a different version, apparently the builds are here. So very cool resources. If you're interested in looking at some pretty fancy code, check that out. And I'm going to try and dig into that, better understand it, and maybe do a live stream on that. So anyway, I thought that was a really fascinating journey. When simple questions come up, I am just pausing and saying, okay, let's talk about that. Let's figure that out. And what's what's going on with that, and are there any other variations? And I'm just asking all these naive questions that send me down these journeys of different types of learning. So thought this was fascinating, and it all came out of one request for one field on one page. And now I just need to decide which way to go. Do we just display the field? Do we store it? Do we use the AppSource extension? And we'll have a conversation with the customer to see what they want to do. Okay. Well, have a great weekend. Hope that was helpful and informative. Talk to you later.
Good